everybody, and welcome to Chapter 26, Book 2, Royal Ranger Series, The Red Fox Clan. Let's go ahead and get into it. Once he was away from the immediate vicinity of the riverbank, Gillen urged Blaze into a steady canter. By the time he caught up with the rest of the party, they were a few hundred meters from the Old Hill Fort. "Any developments back at the ford?" Horace asked, as Gillen rode up and drew reins beside him. "Nothing unexpected. 3 of them tried to cross, and we beat them back. That set them to thinking for a while, as they realized how vulnerable they were once they were in the river. Then they sent one man, wearing armor, to try to get a rope across. He made it to the bank, but got no further." "You shot him?" Horace said. Gillen regarded him with an even gaze. "Well, I didn't walk down and hand him a bunch of jonquils." "What do you think they'll do next?" Gillen paused. He'd been considering that while he was riding to catch up with the mixed force of cavalry and archers. "I think they'll wait for nightfall," he said. "It'd be harder to pick them off in the dark." Horace glanced at the sun, already dipping below the treetops to the west. "That gives us another hour at least," he said. "What time is moonrise tonight?" "Somewhere between the 6th and 7th hour, I think. That'll delay them even further. The moon would give us plenty of light to shoot by." "If you were still there to shoot at them," Horace said. Gillen nodded. "If we were still there to shoot at them," he agreed. Then he gestured toward the ancient structure looming before them. "Let's take a look at this hill fort." As the name suggested, the fort had been built on the site of a natural feature, a low but steep-sided hill. A path spiraled around the hill, leading up to the summit, where a wooden structure had been built, a palisade of logs 2 meters high. There would be a walkway constructed inside it for the defenders. The sides of the hill were covered with long grass, making the hill difficult to climb, especially for men burdened with armor and weapons. Gillen had a mental picture of men slipping and stumbling as they tried to battle their way upward. They'd be badly exposed to arrows, spears, rocks, and other missiles from the fortifications at the top. Horace gave the order for the archers and troopers to remain at the base, while he and Gillen climbed the hill to survey the fort. He sent 2 troopers back down the path that led to the river to give early warning if the Red Fox clan had managed to cross in pursuit. Then he and Gillen urged their horses up the narrow, winding path. Even on the path, the going was steep and difficult. The ground underfoot was packed earth, and the track followed the contours of the hill, spiraling upward. The path was 3 meters wide, and at irregular intervals there were barriers of rock and wood, designed to further delay an attacker's progress. Eventually, of course, an attacking force could outflank the stone and timber barriers across the path, but it would take time for them to do so. They dismounted at the first of these obstacles and heaved the old, rotting panel that served as a gate to one side. "Should we man some of these?" Gillen asked. Horace shook his head. "We don't have enough men. Better to hold the very top, make the foxes climb all the way, then shove them back down." They rode on, circling round to the far side of the hill, then returning once more, always angling upward and passing 2 more barricades as they did. They circled the hill one more time and came to the end of the track. The very top of the hill had been dug out so that they were confronted by a sheer earth wall 1.5 meters high that ran all the way round the hilltop. Above that, the timber palisade stood another 2 meters high. A heavy gate was set into it. They dismounted. Horace tethered his horse to a nearby bush, and they set about scrambling up the packed earth wall on their hands and knees. At their first attempt, they simply slid back down. Then Gillen drew his sax and drove it into the hard earth to provide a secure handhold. Horace did likewise, and they gained the upper level beneath the palisade. They studied the gate. The timber was old and warped, but it appeared solid. There was no sign of rot. "Good hardwood," Horace said appreciatively. "Lasts for years. That'll keep them out." It appears to be doing the same to us, Gillen observed mildly. Horace looked around, seeking some other form of entrance, although he knew there wouldn't be one. Then he stepped close to the wooden wall, standing with his back to it, and held his hands cupped together at thigh height. "Come on," he said. "I'll boost you up." Gillen slung his bow around his shoulders and slid his quiver around to the back of his belt. Then he took a few paces forward and stepped up into Horace's stirruped hands. As Gillen straightened his knee, Horace heaved upward, and their combined thrust propelled the ranger to the top of the wall. He hauled himself over the rough timbers, pausing with one half of his body inside the wall and the other outside, while he studied the wooden walkway running around the interior of the wall. It looked solid enough, so he rolled himself over the parapet and dropped lightly to the old planks. "All okay?" Horace called from below. Gillen rose to peer over the top of the wooden wall, grinning. "Fine," he said. "I'll slip down and raise the locking bar on the gate." "Watch your step," Horace cautioned him. "The timbers in there mightn't be as solid as the walls." Gillen waved acknowledgment and made his way along the catwalk to where he could see a flight of stairs leading down into the interior of the fort. He paused at the top to look around. The timber wall enclosed a circular area approximately 20 meters in diameter. It wasn't a very large space, he thought, but it would be easier to defend with their small body of men. There were 3 large huts and one smaller one in the inner compound. They were constructed from timber and seemed the worse for wear. Originally, the roofs had been thatched, but the thatching had long since rotted away. The huts themselves, built from lighter timber than the fort, had deteriorated badly. They leaned and sagged precariously, looking as if one good push would send them crashing to the ground. He studied the steps for a few seconds, testing them with his weight before he committed himself. The stairway moved slightly under his weight, and 2 of the risers groaned and creaked as he made his cautious way down to ground level. "Have to repair them," he muttered. But on the whole, he was relieved to see that the stairs were sound. Obviously, the defensive, utilitarian parts of the fort had been built to last, using solid hardwood. The accommodation huts were another matter. He hurried to the gate, where a heavy wooden bar was secured in 2 massive iron brackets. The brackets were rusted, but still sound. He lifted the bar and set it to one side. Then he laid hold of the handle on the door and heaved. It opened a crack. Then the old hinges screamed a protest, and it stopped moving. "Give it a shove," he called to Horace. He felt the tall warrior's weight pushing against the door and redoubled his own efforts to pull it open. Reluctantly, the hinges succumbed to their combined efforts, and the door groaned halfway open. Then it stopped completely. "Needs a bit of oil," he said. Horace stepped inside, his eyes darting around as he took in the interior of the fort. "Those huts have had it," he said, and Gillen nodded agreement. "Yes, they're rubbish, but the wall and the walkway look to be pretty solid. The steps need a little strengthening, but they look all right. In fact, it should suit us quite nicely." Horace put his shoulder against the gate and shoved hard. It gave another meter, then stopped. "As you say, this needs some oil." Gillen shrugged. "Do we want it to open any farther?" Horace shoved the door again and opened it an additional few centimeters. "We'll need to get the horses inside," he said. Gillen pursed his lips. He had forgotten that detail. Then a thought struck him. "How do we get them up that final vertical wall?" "By dint of much pushing and heaving and scrambling," Horace told him. "If all else fails, we'll dig out a ramp for them." Dismissing the matter of the gate, he strode into the inner compound. He drew his sword and held it casually beside him. Gillen raised his eyebrows. "I don't think there's anyone here," he said mildly. Horace inclined his head. "Never hurts to be sure," he said. He stopped by the smaller of the huts. Its walls sagged, and the roof timbers had largely collapsed. The door, warped and full of gaps, hung haphazardly by one hinge. He set his foot against the doorpost and pushed. There was a creaking of old timbers and a groan as the fastening pegs gave way, and the entire front wall crashed down in a loud cloud of dust and splinters. That, of course, was the commander's quarters, Gillen said. Horace sniffed disdainfully. I'll make do with the tent, he said. In fact, we all will. They took another 10 minutes to explore the interior of the fort. Not that there was a great deal to see. It had obviously been unused for many years. There was a well in one corner, close to the gate, surrounded by a low stone parapet, and covered with a circular wooden hatch. When Gillen slid the old rotting wooden cover aside and tossed a pebble down, they heard a splash of water far below. Horace leaned over the dark hole and sniffed the air. There was no smell of corruption or rot. He saw an old wooden beaker hanging on a frayed cord beside the parapet, and carefully lowered it down, mindful that the cord could break at any time. He felt the beaker touch the water, moved the cord gently so that the container tipped and filled. Then he retrieved it, sniffed the half-full contents, and tasted it. Water's clean, he said. That's handy, Gillen replied. He peered over the edge of the well's parapet. He thought he could see a tiny circle of light reflecting from the black surface, far below. He stepped back. There were 4 large barrels standing close by. He checked them, but they were empty. What are these for? He asked. Horace shrugged. Maybe for taking supplies of water to different points around the wall, he said. He set the beaker down and looked around once more, satisfied with what he saw. We'll set up our tents in here, he said. Let's bring the others up. Gillen smiled. You can do that, he said. I'll stay here and keep watch. Horace eyed him. In other words, you don't feel like going down that steep path and scrambling back up again. Gillen held out his hands ingenuously. You're the commander. It's your prerogative to lead the troops, he said. Horace rolled his eyes. As you say, I'm the commander. I could order you to do it while I take it easy up here. You know us Rangers, Gillen replied. We're notoriously bad when it comes to obeying orders. But Horace was already striding back toward the gate. All right, that's going to be the end of Chapter 26. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you all next time in Chapter 27. God bless, and have a good one.